Operating system is the main reason that you are using your PC, laptop or mobile and viewing this video currently. It is a system software that manages hardware and software resources. Windows 11, Mac OS, Fedora, Ubuntu, Android, iOS are a few examples of operating systems. At the core of an OS lies an important code known as kernel. Kernel resides in the memory and is responsible for the interactions between the hardware and software components, as well as executing the programs, allocating resources, etc. There are different types of kernels like monolithic kernels, microkernels, hybrid kernels, and so on. And if a user wants to interact with the kernel, he or she would need a program that can do that, which is where a shell comes in. A shell allows the user to give commands to the kernel and get responses from it. Some examples are Bourne shell, Bash, C shell, Z shell, etc. Shells can be accessed using terminal applications like GNOME Terminal, Console, or iTerm. If you look at the most widely used operating system, that is Microsoft Windows, it uses a hybrid kernel called NT kernel. Windows 11 is the latest variation of Microsoft Windows OS, and there are two shells in Microsoft Windows 11, Command Shell and PowerShell, which can be accessed using Windows Terminal application. As you might be aware, this is a commercial OS. Another proprietary OS dominating the market after Windows OS is Mac OS, which is a Unix OS and uses a hybrid kernel called XNU kernel. And the default shell option in Mac OS is Z shell that can be accessed using Terminal Lab. Then we have the Unix-like operating systems, for example Linux, which are mostly open source. Linux OS uses a monolithic kernel called Linux kernel. And the default shell in most of the Linux operating systems is Bash, which can be accessed using DE-specific terminal applications like GNOME Terminal, Console, etc. In most of the Unix and Unix-like OSs, the default shell can be changed. You have to be aware that Linux comes in hundreds of variations called distributions, or in short, distros. There are Debian-based distros like the Debian itself, Ubuntu, Kali Linux, RPM-based distros like Red Hat, Fedora, CentOS, and then we have Pacman-based distros like Arch Linux and its derivative Manjaro, etc. It's a huge list. Check Wikipedia page for the list of Linux distributions. But why Linux OS for bioinformatics? First thing, it is open source and flexible. It is easy to manage once you get accustomed. And most of the bioinformatics packages were developed in and for Unix or Linux operating systems. And I believe that the concept of using multiple CPU cores or threads is well adapted in Linux OS. Okay, enough with the introduction. In this video and the next one, we will deal with two Linux operating systems, Ubuntu and Fedora. We will first download the corresponding ISO files and flash onto USB drives using tools like Balena Etcher or Rufus. Then we will go through the first and recommended way of installing Linux OS, which is dual booting alongside with your existing Windows OS. I will show how to dual boot both Ubuntu and Fedora with Windows. I prefer Fedora over Ubuntu, so my final setup would be dual booting Fedora along with Windows 11. Either Ubuntu or Fedora, all scripts and commands for our bioinformatics analysis remain the same. So the underlying Linux distro doesn't matter. If you don't want to disturb your Windows installation, you can follow either the VirtualBox based installation or setting up Windows Subsystem for Linux to use Ubuntu. Okay, let's get started. So to download Ubuntu ISO file, go to ubuntu.com. On their products page, select Ubuntu desktop and click on the download option. On the download page, you can see two versions of the OS. Generally, Ubuntu is released twice a year, once in the month of April and once in October. These releases usually support updates for 9 months, after which the user may have to upgrade to the latest version. Along with that, for those who need stability, a long-term support version is released every 2 years in the month of April. Updates are supported for up to 5 years. The last LTS version was released in 2024 April and the next one would be in 2026 April. You can select either version and download it. For installing Linux on the system, we have to make a bootable USB drive. To do that, we need tools like Rufus or Bioinformatics. So get a copy of that as well. Right, the files got downloaded and we will start by installing Bioinformatics. Installing HR is pretty straightforward. Double clicking the downloaded file will automatically install it, generate a shortcut and will start the application. Now let's flash Ubuntu onto the thumb drive. As we have seen while downloading, the Ubuntu ISO file is around 5.3 GB in size. So take an empty 8 GB USB drive and insert into your system. In the Bioinformatics application, click on the flash from file option and select the downloaded Ubuntu ISO. Then select the target device, which is the empty USB drive that you have inserted just now. After that, click on flash and it will start flashing the USB drive with Ubuntu. This will take some time. Meanwhile, let's shrink our Windows partition to make space for Linux. Go to the disk management utility, right click on the Windows partition and select shrink volume. Linux will work with a mere 50 GB space, but as suggested in my earlier video, we will be needing at least 150 GB space for our bacterial genome and microbiome analysis. As I have more space, I am shrinking my Windows partition to 450 GB and allotting the rest for Linux. We will install Ubuntu on this free space. So after the flashing is completed, while the bootable USB drive is still attached, restart your system. But before the Windows loader appears, enter the boot menu by pressing the corresponding function key for your system. For my system, it is F8. You can search on Google for what is the boot menu key for your system. Once you are in the boot menu, you should be seeing your USB drive as an option to boot. Select it and press enter to boot into it. Before proceeding with the installation, let's connect to the internet so that additional packages can be downloaded while installing the OS. Then select all default options. We have three options for installing Ubuntu. One is to install alongside with Windows. Second option is to format your hard disk and install Ubuntu as the only OS, which we do not want. And last one is manual installation, where we can create separate partitions for different mount points. For this video, we'll go with the first option, select it and click next. On the next page, we have to create an account with username and password. Do that. And click next. On the final page, it says that two partitions will be used to set Ubuntu mount points. One is an existing Windows EFI partition and another is the partition we created a few minutes back. You can cross-check the partition numbers it is using by opening the disks application. Partition 6 is not yet created. It will use the free space to create that partition 6. That's it. Click on install. It will take some time to finish the installation. Then you can check for the new partition 6 in the disks app. You can then restart your system. It will ask to remove the USB drive. Remove it and press enter. You will be greeted with the GRUB bootloader instead of the Windows bootloader. GRUB bootloader allows you to select between the existing operating systems. So select Ubuntu. You can use up and down arrow keys to navigate through the list and press enter. Now you have a working Linux OS in your system. Check the About section in System Settings to see the configuration. Alright, so at some later stage, if you decide to remove Ubuntu, you may have to first change the bootloader in your BIOS settings. This section is only if you want to remove Ubuntu from your system. So restart your system. In the GRUB menu, select UEFI firmware settings. This will load your BIOS settings. Go to boot options and change the first boot option to Windows Boot Manager instead of Ubuntu. Save the settings and exit. This time, you will not see the GRUB menu, you will directly boot into Windows. Once booted, open the disk management utility and delete the Ubuntu partition, which is partition 6 in my case. If you want to reuse the free space, extend the Windows partition or create a new one. That's all. Ubuntu is now deleted from your system. Now moving on to the second way, you can try Linux by creating a virtual machine using tools like VirtualBox. So download the VirtualBox package and install it. Then start the VirtualBox application and click on New. Enter a name for the new VM and select the downloaded ISO image. In the next drop-down section, add username and password. Then in the hardware section, you can allot the amount of memory and the number of CPUs for the VM. Do not go beyond the green bar in both the cases. I have allotted 4 GB of memory and views. And finally, you can allot the disk space for the VM based on the available space. I am allotting 50 GB for my VM. Click on finish and it will boot using the ISO image. If it doesn't start the installation automatically, click on Install Ubuntu icon. This took a lot of time for me. Once the installation is complete, let it reboot by itself. After rebooting, we will shut down the VM one more time. And change the video memory setting for this VM. Allot the maximum memory. And then restart the Ubuntu virtual machine. Once logged in, change the display settings to maximize the VM's window size. For better viewing, match the resolution with that of the monitor you are currently viewing the VM on. After that, select the full screen mode from the View menu of VirtualBox. Virtual machine is ready. You can open the system configuration and view the allotted resources. And the final way to getting started with Linux and the preferred way over the VirtualBox method is configuring Windows Subsystem for Linux. Search for WSL in the Windows menu and click on the icon. This will open a terminal window with instructions to install WSL. Just press any key to start installing it. Now you have WSL install on your system. You can check in the Windows menu. There will be a new WSL option. Next step is to download the WSL version of Ubuntu. This can be done in two ways. You can either search the Microsoft Store and install it from there, or open the Windows terminal and type WSL. You can list out the available distros by typing WSL-list-online as shown in the terminal. Choose one of the listed distros and type WSL-install and the distro name. Here we will install Ubuntu. This will install and configure the Ubuntu OS. During the setup, it will ask for username and password. Fill those and press enter. Passwords won't be visible. Okay, once done, you are directly taken into the Linux terminal. Check the CPUs that are available for this OS by typing ls CPU. As you can see, unlike the virtual machine, WSL based installation can use all of the system resources. This installation will be available from Windows menu, just like any other Windows application. Right, those are the three ways to start using Linux. In the next video, we will dual boot Fedora with Windows 11 and use the manual partitioning option. We will also look into some basic configurations as well as installing desktop environments and customizing them. After that, we will look into the essentials of Bash. We will meet in the next one. Thank you.